Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this licensing hearing this morning. Today we're hearing an application to vary a licence on the Crofters pub in Bradshaw. I'll do some introductions of people in the meeting, and then I'll briefly go through the procedure that the meeting will follow today. My name is Councillor Debbie Newall, and I'm chairing today's hearing. And I'm joined today by my colleagues, councillors Flitcroft and Morris, and we are the three members that make up the panel that will make the decision today regarding this variation. We're also joined today by our Legal Services Department, Miss Raby, and an observer, and they ensure that all legal processes are adhered to. We also have Mr Mulholland here today from Democratic Services, which is the committee administration, again, to make sure that all our procedures are followed correctly. And we have our licensing officer here today, Miss Klein, who will be presenting the case of the application. And we also have officers from Environmental Health and Regulatory Services, Miss Greenan and Miss King. In the meeting today, on behalf of the applicant, we have Mr Piers Warren, who is, I believe, a solicitor, and Mr Yogi Mistry, who I believe is the, he might clarify this with us, I believe he is the manager of the premises. And then we have our objectors, some residents from nearby, and also ward councillors. So the order of the meeting today will be that the licensing officer will present the case, and then we will be able to ask questions of the licensing officer. Then the applicant will speak and present their case, and we will be able to ask questions of them. And then we will hear from Environmental Health, Regulatory Services and other representations, and that includes the objectors and the ward councillors. And at every stage we will be able to ask questions. After we've gone through those stages, we will have a summing up process whereby everybody again, every party again, will be able to sum up their input into the hearing, and the applicant will make the last summing up. After that, the the committee will retire to make our decision, and we will make our decision known within 5 working days. If you want to ask a question at any point, if you make your presence known to me, I will bring you in and you can ask your question. It could be that you might have to wait a little bit because we've got quite a few people in the meeting today. And at this point, can I just say, we've read all the bundles of information, we've seen all the videos, we've read all the representations quite thoroughly. So when you are making your presentation today, you don't have to go through everything that was in your presentations, because we have read them and we have read them thoroughly. So I think that sort of clarifies the procedure today. Before we start, can we have a declaration of interest? If anybody's got a declaration of interest today?
No.
No. Okay.
No, Chair.
Right, okay. So that's the introductions done. So we'll start firstly now with a presentation by our licensing officer, Ms Klein. Thank you.
Can't hear you, Patricia. Actually.
Can't hear you, Patricia.
Sorry about that. You've had a set of the papers, the report, so I don't intend walking you through that if that's okay, Chair. But just to confirm, you've had an additional set of papers since the report was provided, yes. One from the applicant's solicitor and also one from one of the individuals that's made a representation, which included the videos, again, which all parties have had, so I've nothing further to add.
Thank you, Ms Klein. Has anybody got any questions regarding that statement from Ms Klein? Nope. Okay. We'll now go to the applicant. Is it Mr. Warren? Are you making representation on behalf of the applicant, Mr. Warren, today?
Yes, Chair. Hopefully you can hear me.
I can,
clearly.
yes. Would you like to just make your representation now then, please?
Thank you.
Can I just ask, will Mr. Mistry be speaking as well, or are you speaking on his behalf?
You beat me to the punch, Chair. Yogi is the operator of the premises, so my client, the premises license holder, is the pubco, if you like, and he's our tenant. I'm speaking on behalf of Yogi, but obviously he's here to answer any questions you may have once I've made my presentation. Okay.
Would you like to go ahead, Mr. Warren?
Thank you very much. Can I start actually just by saying thank you to all your officers for working so hard to get us here today, given the interruptions. I think it's worth noting they've done sterling work to actually get us to this hearing today. So on behalf of my client and me in particular, we say thank you very much for that. Look, I know obviously usually we'd look to try to keep to time limits. I found doing all these hearings online around the country, and especially where we can't see each other, I'm afraid I have to go through a bit more detail, because without the interaction it's a bit difficult to know how you're reacting to things if we can't see each other. I much prefer hearings face to face, but please do bear with me. There is a lot of information that we've received, and late in the day some of it, so I will go through it as swiftly as I can, but I think it's important we do it fairly thoroughly. If we can start, we submitted a letter which you've already referred to, so I know you've got that. There was a further letter sent on the same day from Paul Hamer that should have been added to our letter, to our bundle of papers. Now, I'm hoping you'll have seen that, but I just wanted to confirm with you if you had.
I'm not sure whether we've had this letter. Have we had this letter?
Patricia, have we had?
I'm not sure. When was it not part of your original document?
It was sent on the same day as the original bundle was sent in when we had to do the re-redaction. Now, if you haven't seen it and it's not with you, I will just refer to it. I don't think there's any benefit in.
You sent that paperwork to Democratic Services, not to us, didn't you? So I think they were circulating it. So is that correct?
Chair, I think I've got the letter. I can put it on screen. Oh no, I don't think I can, but I think you have been provided with the letter.
I was just mindful it might have been new information that was being introduced, but if it's part of the bundle, that's fine.
The name didn't ring a bell with me, but now I've seen the letter. I've actually seen it.
Okay. Okay. Please continue, Mr. Warren.
Thank you so much. I mean, that just makes things a bit easier. I will refer to it, and actually with all these papers, I'm not going to go through them in detail, but I will sort of refer you to points within the bundle which I paginated. But that letter stands outside because it's not paginated. Look, the application is relatively straightforward, and it's at page 3 of the bundle of papers provided by the committee. And you'll find it at point 6. It's an application to vary the layout effectively to add an external bar to the premises. The second part of the application is to amend the operating schedule, which, if you were to take a brief look at the conditions on there, they run to a significant number of pages. A lot of them are now superseded. You'll find those at pages 33 to 36. But then at page 3 and 4, we've added in the conditions that we are proposing to add to the license if you like, to supersede those conditions. I just want to point you to 2 matters on page 4 very briefly. At the top, you'll see the list of conditions that we are adding. One of the conditions says the external bar servery will only be used between the hours of 10 and 20 to 30 hours. Now, we're prepared to amend that so it reads 2200 hours for the use of the external bar, effectively giving a 30-minute drinking up time, because as you all know from the license itself, the garden area has to close at 22:30. So that's a sort of sensible and pragmatic proposal we're making. And then just as an administrative error, and it's entirely my fault, at the bottom of page 4, the last condition about regulated entertainment being provided, 4 sentences up, it says in the papers, as a maximum, the log will record the date and time of the check. That should read as a minimum. Apologies for that. I do know the difference between maximums and minimums, and unfortunately that error slips through. So that's an amendment to that condition, so it says minimum rather than maximum. So that's the application in a nutshell for you. You will find a plan at page 37 and the premises license at pages 39 to 50. Again, I'm not taking you to those, I'm just giving you the details so that you can look at those in your leisure when you determine this matter. Our letter, which I will refer to quite a lot, which is the letter dated the 18th of March, you will see we propose 2 additional conditions in that letter. Those conditions are that no regulated entertainment will take place outside after 8 PM on any day, and the second condition is about a noise limiter being installed and maintained to levels within the marquee as agreed at the Bolton Protection Office. Now these go beyond the scope of the application, as I've read out and as is before you today, but we believe that actually they give a good indication of how hard Yogi has worked and how hard he is willing to work to meet residents in a compromise that hopefully works for all parties. So those conditions are there in the letter, and we're suggesting that those are added to the license if you're minded to grant the application as applied for. I just want to give you a quick history of the Crofters. Operated by Yogi for 10 years. Yogi himself has had over 20 years experience in operating pubs in and around Bolton, with an exemplary record, I think it has to be said. This year has been, this year and 2020, if we still make those distinctions anymore, given what we've all been through, it's been exceptional. I mean, people talk about a 100-year occurrence. I think actually in licensing terms, this is certainly unique. Premises all had to shut late March and opened again on the 4th of July 2020. Now, Yogi will be the first to admit that when he reopened on the 4th of July in 2020, it was a difficult time. You know, first of all, everyone was so weary from being stuck in their houses. They came out with a vengeance. That 4th of July, if you recall, was a Saturday. And I think everyone would say it was a difficult and challenging time for everyone in the industry. And certainly Yogi would say there were teething troubles for him as there were with anyone else. And we'll come on to some of the emails and letters submitted by the residents, I think by Mr. Bouchard in a moment. But at this stage, it's just fair to say when he opened, like everyone else, he was trying to fight against a significant number of new regulations and guidance, but worked very, very hard to get it right. You may recall at the time as well, Robert Jenrick MP, who's the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, sent out a letter requesting that local authorities reduce the burden on hospitality, and that people needed to recognise there would be compromises and difficulties along the way, given what everyone was going through. So as part of the improving process and trying to run his business successfully and safely, importantly, in mid-August, a bar was installed outside. This was following liaison with the police and local authorities, but the benefits that everyone could recognise in terms of helping with social distancing, stopping pinch points around doorways, COVID security, etc., were the key drivers for that. So that was installed at that time, and this license application is to regularise that and to indeed allow for a bar outside going forward from here. The music outside was a bit of a learning process, but Yogi's always looked to strike the correct balance on this. We do not accept that the levels of the music were public nuisance, certainly not after very early days. One has to remember that, and you'll see this from letters we come on into a minute, that Yogi spent a lot of time coveting feedback from residents in the area, and the feedback in the main was that this was fine and actually very welcome in a time where people were restricted in what they could do and could not do. So there you are. That's where we were going through and into lockdown and coming out the other side. It's important to note that for this application, actually COVID's not over. Obviously, premises opened on the 12th of April, or some did, some still haven't opened, quite a significant number. 17th of May is the next date that we're looking at for some limited activities inside, and then 22nd of June thereafter. But these are movable dates, they're not set in stone. And indeed, if you want an example of how the government thinking is going, they are looking at extending the Business and Planning Act from September 2021 to September 2022, which deals with things like having marquees outside, off sales, etc. So you get a feeling, and certainly from our perspective, that this isn't over, and we need to recognise that. But post-COVID, when all this is over, when we get back to what we would all call new normality, it's key to note that Yogi wants to put music inside, with the exception of special events such as his Santa's Grotto and maybe a summer dinner festival and a few others. We're happy to restrict that to 8 events outside a year, but actually that is after COVID. At the moment, we are, I'm afraid, in a position where all activities must be outside. And indeed, I think people are going to want to be outside for a very significant period, even when they're potentially allowed inside. We want to keep the external bar outside and potentially at least part of the marquee, but the marquee isn't part of our discussion today. It's proving very popular, but the benefit of an external bar goes beyond COVID-19 in terms of promotion of the licensing objectives, in particular, the public safety objective, because as you can imagine, if you've got lots of customers outside, them coming in and out of doorways or queuing at a bar, there are issues with glasses, maybe people spilling drinks, etc. Secondly, from a supervision point of view, which goes to public nuisance, if you have a bar outside, it needs to be permanently supervised, which again promotes the objectives in terms of prevention of public nuisance. So we say that the bar should be allowed as a permanent addition to the license outside for those reasons. Now, consumption outside is not a licensable activity, so in any event, obviously people can drink outside now or after COVID. I want to turn quickly to the representations that we received against applications. I'll go into detail, but I will touch upon the main issues that have been raised, and then I'll just touch on the main issues raised in the additional representations and videos that you've all seen. Just so you've heard our views on these things. I'm going to refer to our letter again, so it might be worth having that in front of you, and it's paginated, and I'll be referring to the letters in support. Now, you'll be pleased as a committee, I would hope, to note that we went through the letters that Yogi had received, and we took out those that we felt went to or addressed the issues that are at stake here today, or some of the issues that have been raised by other residents. There were over 111 letters that I had the privilege of reading. We decided perhaps sending all of them to you would not be beneficial for anyone's health or sanity. So we've selected some of those that we think are most important. So the issues raised by residents, let's go through one by one. Toilet provision. Yogi paid for additional male and female toilets outside. And if you go to page 6 of the letters, you will see actually local resident states in his letter in the second paragraph at the bottom of the second paragraph, last sentence, the outdoor toilets are spacious, clean and easily accessible. And that is actually reflected elsewhere as well. I'll come on to the letter from Mr. Hamer in a little while. Music levels intolerable. That was a quote from one of the letters from the residents. First of all, we need to understand that not all noise outside and not all music noise outside is a public nuisance. Public nuisance is a legal definition, but noise outside in and of itself does not cause a public nuisance. It has to be over certain levels and has to be unjustified. We say that those aren't realistic here, and I'm going to give you some evidence in a second. But so that you're aware, Yogi did put limits on the levels of the music and carries out checks when he has music outside to make sure those levels aren't breached. And you'll see reference to this in the resident letter supporting him. So at page 8, for instance, this is a resident whose home is very close to the premises. He can see the marquees from his house. Lived there for 16 years. I can hear noise on occasion, but it's no means any more intrusive than the noise from the road or the cricket club, he says. Yogi, he says he constantly liaises with the community to ask if there's any complaints or problems. And at the bottom, his final paragraph, the bottom, his second sentence up to the bottom, he says, any music performed in the outside marquee area has been of a reasonable level. There are other examples of this. Page 10 is a good example. Someone whose rear windows overlook the garden, again, and this is an NHS nurse who works various shifts. Any noise is not intrusive or by any means offensive to our enjoyment of our home or garden. We'd have no difficulty in approaching Yogi if that changed. And page 11, just quickly.
Read all these letters, and this is just duplication, isn't it? Would you agree?
I was just pointing out the bits that, if you like, give the evidence to the other side of these points in general. I can just give you the page numbers and not read the paragraph.
I was actually referring to
Chair, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was on mute. Sorry, Mr. Warren, we have read all these letters. I do appreciate you putting flesh on the bones of your application by pointing out the very relevant parts of the letters, but we have read them, and your application really, we want to hear from you. We want to hear about your application, but we have read all your letters, so there is no need to go through them like this.
Chair, if you're happy, I mean, I was limiting myself to one or two examples for each of the issues, but I'm happy to go with what you say. I'll just refer to the page numbers just for reference. So the use of the external bar, which is the nub of this application. Indeed, I've given you the reasons why we say actually having the bar promotes the licensing objectives. It's very clear that it promotes the COVID public safety issues, but it goes beyond that for the reasons I've explained. The other issues raised by residents include taxi parking, and you'll see references to that at pages 8 and 12 of our bundle. There is also helpfully a map at page 22. I just want to refer you to that shows actually his taxi, the efforts he's gone to put in a taxi pickup point to assist residents on that. Sorry, I don't know whose phone that is, but litter again, obviously that's dealt with. You'll see at page 14. Yogi does go to a lot of trouble to try and keep the area clear where he can. And in terms of drunken disorderly conduct, there is obviously no police representation. So as you'll note from the guidance at paragraph 2.1, the police should be the main evidence in terms of crime and disorder issues arising from the we do have, as I say, the letter from Paul Hamer, which I have referred to. There is a very good list at the bottom of there of his observations as a police officer and a local resident. He's writing as a local resident, that I would commend to you to demonstrate quite the length that Yogi's gone to in terms of operating his premises properly. There was a separate letter as well we got from the head of his door team to express how easy it was to work with Yogi and how Yogi gave them their heads in terms of things like body-worn foot cameras, etc., to make sure all the processes were in place. So that's just a flavour for you to demonstrate quite how much they have gone to promoting the objective. I will quickly address, Chair, if you don't mind, the representation from Environmental Protection, which is at pages 52 and 53. And I've got 3 quick points I want to make about this.
If you could be brief, Mr. Warren, you have been speaking for 15 minutes.
Yes, no, I appreciate that. And then I'll very quickly address the additional reps, the videos, etc. And that's me done. So that's the last 2 things I'll do. The 3 points I wanted to raise is there's no evidence actually that the music itself was at a level that caused a statutory nuisance at all in any of the papers here today. And the mere presence of noise, as I say, is not enough for music to be a nuisance. And also I'd say that actually the representation that was received does not deal with the issue that consumption is permitted outside in any event in terms of the numbers of people. Yogi's adamant about this. He's not putting any more people in the premises than he would have done under normal times. It's just simply at the moment that they have to be outside and they can't be inside. So, Chair, I do appreciate you indulging me a little. I will just address the representations and videos because they were added late in the day, and we've had to do this a little bit on the fly. Taxis and queuing has always been a problem at the Crofters. Now, taxis isn't an issue here today. Obviously, it's not part of the licensing, but what we'd say is this: we've put in a taxi system. People from other premises we know stand outside the Crofters waiting for taxis. So everything you see outside the Crofters is not necessarily related to it. And that's simply for safe and ease, actually, of ordering taxis. You'll see that there were early teething troubles that are referenced in the letter, and the emails that have been put in place. Yogi.
Hello? Are you there, Mr. Warren?
9.21 of the guidance, that's the personal responsibility of people outside the premises. But believe you and I, if Yogi caught anyone doing that, they would be dealt with appropriately. The car park was referenced for people parking in private car parks. Well, those signs that are referenced in the photographs were put up by Yogi to assist there. So I hope that helps. And the Audi in the vision cleaning car park, which is referenced, Yogi followed that up with Linda in an email, and she wrote back on the 14th of April to say she had absolutely no problem with the car, the Audi, because it had been parked with their permission, because they know the chap and he'd asked. Okay. So again, I think it's useful just to put that out. The photos of groups of lads, etc., don't get us very far. Yogi operates a challenge 25 policy. And indeed, where they reference the beer bottle and the wine bottle, which obviously is not nice to see, Yogi decants all of his beer, so no one has any beer bottles in the premises at all. It's decanted into plastic glasses. So that goes to the point I was making about people coming from elsewhere, standing around there, which could be observed and seen as probably being from the premises.
Okay.
Since reopening, so we've had a week of reopening or so, there have been police visits, and there have been no issues raised with them. I mean, obviously, again, we're in the first week of trying to get things open, and systems will improve, but that's where we are at the moment, Chair. And the application itself for the outside bar, I think, and I hope you would agree, promotes the objectives. And I'm sorry I did go on a bit longer than perhaps you would like, but that's difficult to do online. That's
perfectly all right, Mr. Warren. I appreciate everybody wants to put their points forward today, and we're going to be fair to every party, and everybody will have their say. So
I've cut back in significant ways on what I could have said.
Yeah,
I assure you, Chair.
Okay, so are you finished now, Mr. Warren? Is that?
I'm happy to take any questions, and I have a few comments on the law for summing up. That's it.
Okay, yeah, you'll get a chance to sum up later. Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Have any elected members or officers got questions for Mr. Warren?
Yeah, can I ask one, Debbie?
Yeah, Councillor Morris, yeah.
Mr. Warren, you talk about live music will finish at 8 o'clock. What about pipe music?
Sorry, what about piped music, did you say?
Yes, you said live music will finish at 8. What time will pipe music finish?
So background music is not licensable, and it's intended that actually that would go through a limiter as part of the condition, so it shouldn't actually be any disturbance whatsoever. So that would end at 10 or 10:30 outside, in line with the closure of the garden.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, any other questions from officers? No. Do we have any questions from any of the objectors?
Yes, can I? Neil Longworth.
Yeah, Mr. Longworth, can I just ask you to bear in mind that you will be given a chance to make your objection. So this is just questions regarding what Mr. Warren has said in his presentation. Okay.
Yes, he mentioned the level of music and the noise limits. Could you tell us what the maximum level permissible is in a place of work and in a public performance? And who will monitor that? Will it be the council or will it be the pub themselves? Will they be self-policing or will the council monitor that noise level? And what is the maximum permissible noise
Well, the maximum permissible depends on which bit of legislation you're talking about, but in fairness, I don't think that's relevant for here today. What I will say is the condition that's been offered.
So it's not relevant.
No,
please, Mr. Longworth, please let Mr. Warren finish.
Yes.
What is relevant is that actually, you know, I don't want to go into a legal treatise about the difference between Health and Safety at Work Act, the Licensing Act, and the other legislation, health and safety legislation that the licensing officers and EH officers refer to, because they're all different. What I will say is this: we've offered a condition that says a noise limiter is to be installed and used to maintain music levels within the marquee at a level agreed and set with Bolton environmental protection officers. So that would mean that any music that... Sorry?
What is that level then? Give me a figure.
Mr. Longworth, would you just let Mr. Warren answer the question, please?
Yeah.
So that condition requires Yogi to work with the officers to set a level that is acceptable, so wouldn't cause statutory or public nuisance. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to be silent, perhaps, but it does mean it will be at a level that's deemed acceptable. I can also say that Yogi's had an acoustic report commissioned, the results of which we've just had back, that's going to be shared with the EH officers as part of the liaison with them to make sure those levels are set at a correct level.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Warren. Are there any more questions for Mr. Warren?
Yes, it's from Graham Butchart.
Mr. Bushard, please go ahead.
Yeah, obviously he's referenced to the videos that I sent in. I'm still trying to work out. He said obviously that Yoga should put in toilet facilities. I don't understand quite how the toilet facilities were so good if the bushes were better, because on numerous occasions throughout the summer last, and I fear that's going to happen again this summer, those bushes were actually the toilet of choice. Since they've reopened, and this again is a concern for me, I have witnessed one person urinating behind my house, and I have seen someone walk down and had to challenge them because they're going to do the same. At the same time, I was actually rammed by a car.
Mr. Bushard, we've got all this in your representation, in your letters. I'm asking you, have you got a question?
The question is, how are they going to make sure that the toilet facilities and people aren't going round? He said that they check the area. I haven't actually seen any challenging, even by his gentleman, of people doing things wrong.
Okay, Mr. Bourne, could you answer that?
How are they actually going to implement that, please?
Okay.
Sorry, would you like me to respond?
Yes, please, Mr. Warren, if you can.
Of course, yeah. Well, let's start with the public urination. As I say, no one wants to see that. Absolutely no one wants to see that. And if you have any evidence of customers coming from the Crofters, Yogi is more than happy to speak to you about that. Let me remind you, there are people who come from other premises waiting around that area, such as the people with the bottles that couldn't have come from the Crofters.
They came from the pub. I've observed them.
Mr. Bushard, would you let Mr. Warren finish, please? Thank you, Mr. Warren.
There is a lane that goes down the side of the Crofters, which is a cut through from Rigby Lane and a load of premises that are at the top and head on the road out to Bolton. So actually, to say that everyone that's observed there is from the premises is simply not correct. Secondly, and this is a letter directly from Linda from Vision Cleaning Services, who is the person you referenced in your representation, and you submitted the email to. She says this in an email to Yogi from the 14th of April this year. We were sent several videos by Mr. Bouchard and obviously thought this was disgusting in terms of the urination, but rectified the problem by putting up a fence and has had no problems since. As I said, the problem is solved now. So I would strongly disagree, and I think Yogi would probably be jumping up and down if we were sitting in a committee room together at the moment, to say that the preferred toilet of choice is the bushes for his customers. That people urinate in places like that is despicable, but that is, I'm afraid, an issue for people's own conscience. What Mr. Yogi has done and continues to do is try and police the area as best he can. At the moment, I'm afraid you're aware you're outside videoing and obviously looking on quite regularly at the moment. That has been a cause of some concern for the security staff because it's agitating people, not only customers who are being videoed. So we've just got to be careful here to make sure that we're not tarring everyone with the same brush as being either customers or all urinating in bushes. I think that's a very unfair assessment.
Okay, right. So, Mr. Bushard, have you any other further questions for the applicant at this point? Bearing in mind you will get a chance to raise your objections. Okay.
Yeah. Just to point out that I observed before videoing those people come out of the pub with the glass and the bottle, and I was watching people going in and out of the pub.
Okay, Mr. Bushard, you'll get a chance to make your point. Right. No, so we've finished with the applicant now. Have you finished, Mr. Warren? You have finished?
Yes, thank you.
No further questions for the applicant.
Chair, sorry, it's Catherine King. Sorry, could I?
Yes, I was going to bring you in, Kath, next. Have you got a question for the applicant?
I did have a question, yes. It's just a point of clarity.
Yes, please go ahead.
Mr. Warner referred to after COVID times and a number of 8 events per year that he would use the outdoor area. Could you just clarify, is that 8 days of events, or is that 8 events that could be, say, 4 days, 2 days? Please.
I think that's a very valid question. Most of the events would be a single day events, but the Santa's Grotto or things like that may run over a number of days. The reality is it would be limited. Santa's Grotto was outside sort of singers, Christmas carols and all that kind of thing. If there were problems with those events or the numbers of events, then obviously it would be for residents to be able to apply and review the license. But that's the maximum estimated. We think it'll be less than that a year, if we're honest.
So we're not quite sure exactly how many event days there would be per year.
Yogi, who is on the call, might be able to tell you how long the Christmas event lasted, or his, any proposed beer festivals. That might give you a better idea if you're happy to ask Yogi directly.
Yeah, eight single days is enough, is adequate for us.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, could I bring in our environmental health officer now, please, Caroline Greenan? Did you want to make a point, Caroline?
Yes, please. Yes. So, I mean, obviously, firstly, I want to acknowledge that the licence trade's been very badly hit by the pandemic, and obviously they continue to be so. But my concerns in relation to this application is that it seeks to permanently vary the premises licence. So it's not an application just for a few months to get over the coronavirus crisis, or currently it's not for a limited number of events. It seeks for a permanent variation. As you're aware, that the application seeks to license the external bar survey and extended licence area to cover the car park. There's a large marquee on the site which holds up to 200 people seated at tables, and potentially that capacity could increase if social distancing measures were no longer required. Obviously, from the 17th of May, that's additional people in addition to the people who obviously will be able to go inside the premises. So my concerns are in relation to the impact of the proposals on public nuisance, in particular noise. And the reason why I made the representation is that the marquee and the outside space don't provide any adequate noise attenuation, which means that any activity in the area is likely to be audible at residential properties in the area. The nearest residential properties within 15 metres of the marquee. The suggestion about the sound limiting device, which could be installed at controlled noise levels, it is an issue. Agreeing a suitable noise level using a sound limiting device is very difficult, even within a building. They often don't resolve problems associated with frequency or tonality, so for example, bass music. and as the marquee is not an effective structure at reducing noise breakout, to play music that would be audible at a level when it, that would provide sort of adequate entertainment to people inside the marquee, particularly if it's at capacity, it would mean that that music would need to be played at a level which I believe would be likely to cause a nuisance. And in addition, that sound limiting device wouldn't address any issues arising from talking or shouting from the people inside the marquee. We did receive some complaints about noise, particularly in relation to live music during the summer. And at the time, the restrictions and the guidance which was in place and remains in place requires that marquees only played at a volume that requires people inside not to shout. So it's obviously at a very low level. We did get complaints. We didn't establish that the noise was causing a nuisance, and the reason for that was because obviously we had a series of different lockdowns, so we just weren't able to. Basically, we didn't have enough time to get into people's properties to be able to do an assessment to determine whether the noise levels were excessive or not. So, in relation to this suggestion about restricting the entertainment or live music until 8 o'clock, I'd make the point that noise nuisance can occur any time of the day or night, and if the music is being played on a regular basis, even up till 8 o'clock at night, that it is likely to cause issues, particularly given the proximity to residential, to the residents in the area, and the fact that obviously the marquee just doesn't have really any sort of ability to reduce the noise. Obviously, infrequent events, maybe they could be dealt with through temporary event notices. But I think that obviously the concerns are that the size of the marquee, the number of people within it, and the fact that it's just not got any kind of really acoustic properties in terms of reducing the noise from that area.
Okay.
I think that was all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Greenan. Have we any questions from members or officers, other officers for Ms. Greenan? Have we got any other questions from any of the other representations?
Chair, it's Piers Warren here. I just had one very quick question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Sorry, thanks, Ms. Greenan. Just to confirm then that there were no complaints of the music being a statutory nuisance. No findings that the music was at a level that would be a statutory nuisance or public nuisance. Is that correct?
It is, but only because it wasn't assessed. So, that you shouldn't read into that there was no nuisance. We did receive complaints, but we didn't come to a view one way or the other. So you shouldn't read into that there was no nuisance.
No, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions now for Ms. Greenan? No? Right, well, we'll move on now to other representation. So I think we'll hear first from the ward councillor, which I believe is Councillor Haslam. Did you want to make a representation, Councillor?
Yes, it's more common. I'm one of the councillors for the Bradshaw ward, the ward in which the Crofters is situated, and I'm also speaking on behalf of my ward colleagues, Councillor Mudassa Dean and Councillor Jackie Radcliffe. The Crofters, which has been in Bradshaw for many centuries, is a well-established pub and restaurant in Bradshaw, and is generally well run in my judgment. Speaking personally, on the occasions I've visited the establishment, there's never been any trouble, and it's a warm and welcoming establishment. It is well regarded by many residents in the area, and it's a focal point for many local organisations, church, school, community groups to meet there, and they're always made very welcome. During the period when the Crofters was open last year, on the occasions I visited it, the COVID regulations were adhered to, with track and tracing measures, temperatures of every customer taken, and table service. I understand that this application is only necessary because of the outside bar being installed, and this is necessary because of the steps between the public house and car parking area on the health and safety grounds for the staff of the establishment. If I understand the position correctly, it would be no need for a variation of the licence if it were not for the outside bar. Many other establishments in Bolton have installed outside facilities such as marquees and open-sided structures without the need for variation. The position of music and noise outside is in effect unaltered by this application. The outside bar area will help staff and enable more supervision to be possible. The government have announced many measures to enable the hospitality sector to reopen with the provision of such items I've described above. We are mindful of the government measures to encourage business to get back to normal. Our main concern, obviously, with it being a residential area with many families living in close proximity, is the possibility of noise. And I've had conversations with Mr. Mystery, and he's tried to address these issues with his offer of no regulated entertainment after 8 p.m, a noise limiter being installed to maintain music levels at a level to be set by the Bolton Environmental Protection Officers, no music in the external area, the bar to stop serving at 10 o'clock, and limitation on the capacity of numbers. I do feel I have an issue with the live music outside, that it has to be extremely limited, and also I do feel that in the post-COVID world it's got to be even more limited in number of times, and limited to background music only would be my preference, which would help matters. I think we know that Mr. Mystery is always willing to talk to residents about any concerns, and from conversations I've had with him, he will continue to do so. And I think this might give you, Madam Chairman, some points you may wish to consider in any terms you'd like to add to the in your deliberations. You will be only too aware of the numbers of submissions which have been made with this application, and this illustrates the important role that the Crofters has in the community. I've personally received in excess of 100 submissions in favour of the application, and up to this week only 3 emails against. And in the last 3 days I've received and been made aware of a further 20 against. The objections have to be addressed and taken seriously. The examples of antisocial behaviour are serious and worrying. The earlier closing time should help address this. And whereas, of course, the activities of people outside the premises cannot be the responsibility of the public house, additional levels of supervision will try improve this, and I think this should be something which can be considered. I don't need to remind you that if this variation in the licence is granted, and if there are breaches of the conditions, then the usual procedure of regulation can be imposed of review, and in extreme cases even of revocation. But I think in the extraordinary circumstances which we're living through with the pandemic, it is a reasonable request to have this outside facility. But I am still concerned about the live music outside. And as I said, I've had so many representations, and I would just like to conclude with one sentence from one of these letters, and it says, ultimately, a sensible compromise needs to be found in order to allow the business to continue its activity in a proper manner, in line with all the regulations in force as a consequence of its activity and location. And so if that sort of those considerations can be taken into account, I'm prepared to accept the application. Thank you. And if anyone has any questions, I'll happily take them.
Hello, it's Graham Butcher. I'd like to ask you a question.
Yes, certainly. Thank you.
You said in the last couple of days you've received 20 more objections?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Can I just highlight to you that those of us who objected to the licence variation leafleted in the last week 100 properties. So you've actually got 20 replies from 100. That tells you how the local people who knew nothing about the various now feel. So I think that needs to be taken into consideration by the committee. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I was on Bradshaw Road myself on, was it Wednesday afternoon, and I did see a copy of the letter, the leaflet you sent out, and I did speak with three separate sets of residents, and had a reasonable conversation with them. And you know, obviously everyone is concerned, but equally a lot of people want the Crofters to succeed and be run in a proper manner. And I do believe that the ownership of the Crofters do want it to run and will take on board sensible and in fact all suggestions to improve the situation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Before we move on now to our objectors, I'm just mindful that Mr. Mystery hasn't spoken, so I just wondered whether Mr. Mystery wanted to make any kind of representation before we move on to the next part of the meeting. No.
Well, all I can say, I'm happy to work with anyone. The council, the residents, and I'm always willing to listen and talk to any of you. So the door is always open and always will be.
Okay, Mr. Mystery, thank you. So we're going to go on to the other representations now, which are the objectors. So I've got 3 people on the list: Mr. Bouchard, Mr. White, and Mr. Longworth. So I think it's probably best if we go in alphabetical order: Mr. Bouchard, Mr. Longworth, and then Mr. White. Can I just remind you what?
Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry.
Mr. White isn't in the meeting.
Oh, was Mr. White?
It's
right,
on the list, but he
Mr.
did
Longworth.
dial in. Yes. Yeah,
thank you. Can I just remind both gentlemen what I said earlier to Mr. Warren? We have seen all the bundles, we've seen all the videos, we have watched them, we've read all the literature. So there really is no need to go over the body of your objections again. What we would like to hear from you is, a précis of your objections, just a summation of what your objections are, and then I'll open it to questions as well. So you will get to put your point over, but there's no need to go over what we've already read. So can I ask Mr. Bouchard first? Would you like to make your representation?
Okay, certainly, yeah. First of all, can I just say, I have never, and it's in my letters, said I want the pub closing. That is in actual fact the last thing I want. I want the pub, and I've said this to Mr. Mystery when he came round after the last meeting, to sort of buttonhole me in my front garden. I want to be able to be in my back garden, enjoy the nice weather, listen to his clients clinking glasses, enjoying themselves, and possibly be able to hear the cricket club down the bottom end doing their activities. That's what we used to be able to hear, and I don't have a problem with that at all. What I have a problem with is what we had last summer, which is where we had very loud music playing all the time. I actually took a meter reading on a phone. Now, I know they're not accurate. This was part way onto his property. It was on the exit, and it was over 87 decibels. Now, I believe that wasn't actually what it was supposed to be. That was when Radio Edit, the band, were playing, and they were just doing their final encore. So I do not want the pub closed. I will say that absolutely categorically. I think the issue with the police not having any objections actually says more about the tolerance of the people around the pub than the actual pub's activity. There have been and continue to be issues with lawlessness, people, as I say, urinating in the area. We are very tolerant. We don't phone the police every single time we see something that's going on. We know that the police are stretched, and response times mean that if we're looking at someone urinating, it's not going to be captured because they're going to be gone by the time the police arrive. Hence my reason for videoing. Okay, now I will state categorically those people were coming from the pub to those bushes and urinating. I will state categorically that the people who were outside my house with the bottle and the glass, the 2 bottles, the wine bottle and the beer bottle, were from the Crofters. They walked up out of the car park to the Crofters. They weren't people who randomly drifted in from the area. They were from that pub. The number of people we've been told hasn't increased. I'm sorry, that just isn't true. We never had people queuing up outside the pub to get in. Now, I know you'll say, oh, it's to do with the COVID regulations. It isn't. There are sittings of 200 people plus every single 2 hours. So what you get is 400 people, 200 coming in, 200 going out. That means that basically we are getting over 1,000 people per day, and certainly weekends that's trying to get in or out of that pub. Okay, and therefore there will be increased problems with taxis and the traffic. The traffic is horrendous at times, and certainly was last summer. That was one of the reasons why I took the video on that day on the 8th of August, because the point where we were saying we can't even get to our own home. When we get home, there's so many taxis around, there's so many people, they are going urinating here, there and everywhere. A lot of people who seem to come from Bromley Cross or Bradshaw Meadows area and dissipate up the 2 roads, the road down that's called Rigby Lane and the one opposite going up towards St Mary's School. I understand that obviously there were a lot of letters that said, we want the pub, it's great, it's what we want. That is what Yogesh has gone out of his way to get, and that's exactly his prerogative. He has asked people who attend the pub to support his pub. That is fine. Up until the day after our last meeting, when it was adjourned, I have never spoken to Yogesh in my life. I have lived in the house for 27 years. He has run the pub for 10. He talks to local residents who are clients of his establishment. Does not talk on a regular basis, or in my experience, ever, people who are not people who frequent his public house. The marquees are ridiculous in size. I'm sorry. I understand why he wanted it. Again, in my letter, I did point out that I understand why he needed to make some outside space for his clients. There's not a problem with that. But seat hundreds of people, and it has increased the capacity of the pub significantly, they are too big. They also have no architectural merit, and we are slap bang. The car park is actually the centre of a conservation area. I understand that rules have been made a little bit more lax, but this looks like the rules have just been thrown out completely. It's not in keeping with the area. It's bringing people in from all over the Bolton area and beyond. And I would hazard a guess that it was probably the only venue in Bolton that was playing live music during the pandemic, and it would probably be the only venue in the northwest that was playing live music to guests. Obviously, I don't want to go back to what we had in the summer. That's the long and short of it. If the bar's allowed outside, and then the music with that, we will get it as still being the venue in Bolton to come to, and therefore we will get people from outside coming in their masses. And that's the problem. Once you get that situation, and it happened on the first Monday, April the 12th, I came home at just before 9 o'clock. At 10 to 9, as I was getting to my house, I was approached by someone who was walking down the road looking for somewhere to urinate. When I challenged them, they turned around and walked away. As he walked up, the car was doing a 3-point turn. The passenger got out of the back and urinated behind my house. I then spoke to the security people across the road about this, and as I was speaking to them across the road, I was actually physically rammed by the car and told to get out of the way. Unfortunately, I didn't get the full registration plate. Otherwise, I would have thrown that through to the police. What worries me is it is starting again, and we're not even in the holiday period of July and August. So that's where my objections lie. Okay.
Okay, Mr. Bushard. Sorry, have you finished?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Has anybody got any questions for Mr. Bushard?
Chair, I have one after your committee have asked any questions they may have.
I'm sorry, who's that speaking, please?
Sorry, it's Piers Warren. Sorry, I keep forgetting
Mr.
we're all on
Warren,
the phone.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Warren. Sorry, I haven't got your face up in front of me.
I know, it makes it so difficult. Sorry, I will announce myself next time. Mr. Bishop, it's just one very, very quick question. In the additional papers you submitted that we received last week, you have in there an email trail that seems to show that Helen, I guess Helen, your wife.
That was my wife, yes.
Yeah, had a email correspondence with Yogi in July.
That's correct.
Yeah, but you said you've had no dealings with him.
I have had no dealings with him. My wife did.
Okay, but you weren't aware of those emails then?
I knew she sent it. I didn't know there was a reply, but that is not.
Okay, it's just that it's in your paper.
That was my wife rejecting it back, and I think she sent another one, and there was nothing after that.
Okay, no, it's just that it was in the additional papers you submitted. That's all.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
I know I complained to the pub that there were problems because at the front of the house, she goes to bed earlier than I do. She was at the front of the house and was woken up by noise that was going on, taxis beeping, which has been obviously been a problem, and loud noise and the like. But yes, she contacted Yogesh.
Okay, thanks. That's the only point I have.
Thank you. If there's no more questions from Mr. Bushard, we will go to Mr. Longworth. Would you like to make your objections, Mr. Longworth?
Yes, hello. Basically, it's the noise levels, the noise we can hear in our properties. We can hear the beat, the rhythm, the sung words. My grandson lives next door and he dances on the bed at like 9:30, 10 o'clock. The music is that loud. So there's no way that this music has been turned down.
Mr. Longworth, do you think you could just speak up a bit, please, if you don't mind? I can't quite hear you properly.
Oh, I'm sorry, my phone's been covered up by a pad. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Yeah, good. So it's the noise and it's the enjoyment of our gardens. I'm concerned that you want to play music till 8 p.m. at night, but that would include all afternoon as well, that we have to endure this. And we have large gardens, we like to sit and we like to enjoy them. I concur with everything Mr. Buckshart has said. Some of the comments that we've had, this letter from Mr. Hamer, the policeman, he stated in his letter that the Bradshaw Meadows where he lives runs adjacent to the Crofters pub. And he put that in black and white. It's incredible for a police officer to think Bradshaw Meadows runs adjacent to Crofters pub. If you look at just a cursory glance at the map, will show you it's some half a mile away. It's just made up. And you're holding him up as a fine upstanding police officer. He doesn't seem to know where he lives or where the Crofters is. It's incredible. What else was I going to say? I'm rushing for time because I've got a medical appointment at 11:15 and I need to be at Harwood. I need to be there now at the Health Centre. So basically, I'll have to wrap it up now. I'm sorry about that. I have to go. Okay. That's the unless anyone has a question, of course.
Yeah. Has anybody got a question for Mr. Longworth?
Can I just add, the only time I've spoken to Yogesh was last week, and during the conversation, he accused me of being a racist, and that was my reason for the objection, which, to be honest, is, if it's slander or anything, perhaps your solicitor knows that, but it's completely and utter nonsense. And it was overheard by another neighbour who was in his garden at the time, and he told me he'd heard that afterwards.
Okay, now, Mr. Longworth,
that's the kind of guy we're dealing with.
Mr. Longworth, we're going off the subject of what we're here to discuss today.
Well, I'm just trying to illustrate what kind of conversation.
Well, has anybody got any questions for Mr. Longworth? No. Thank you, Mr. Longworth. What we're going to do. It's all right. It's okay. It's okay. What we're going to do now is going to go.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Could I just say, I have Mr. Longworth's daughter has visited my house and been to my house and is friends with my wife and partner. So I only went to approach him to say, look, your daughter has been to my house, has visited my house. So I am approachable, because if one's daughter can visit my house, surely I would assume we have that type of relationship, an enabling relationship, if I'm allowing her daughter to come into my house and visit my wife and stay over for a drink. That's all I'd like to say.
Okay, we're getting off the subject here now, but I appreciate your comments, Mr. Mystery. Has anybody got any further questions before we go to some summations? Right. Can we go back then, please, to the licensing officer? Would you like to sum up, please, Ms. Klein?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I have nothing further to add. The matters for your determination today are contained within the report, so I have no further summary to add to it.
Okay, thank you. The applicants, would you like to sum up your application?
Chair, I thought you said we'd go last on your papers.
Oh, you're right. Sorry, that was today's
No worries.
deliberate mistake. Do apologise. I'm reading the order in which you spoke earlier. Right. Is there any more comments either from the EHO or the regulatory services representatives here today?
No further comments from me.
No,
thank you.
No. Okay. Right. Councillor Haslam, would you like to make a summation, or have you said what you wanted to say?
No, I've said all I want to say.
Yeah,
thank you.
And finally, the objectors. This is your chance now to sum up, you know, your objections to this matter, and you know, tell us fully, you know, what your position is. So, would you want to go first, Mr. Bouchard?
Oh, yeah, I think I've kind of already summed up what the issues are. I don't think it needs any further sort of raking over. Just one thing, I looked at my notes and realised, I think there is a point at which, with the permanent variation of the licence, I think there's an article in there about there being need for the marquee to stay permanently for 120 people. Now that would be a problem for us as locals, because again, there would be increased traffic and the like. I understand outdoor spaces and the like, whilst we've got the COVID on, but to make that permanent would be, I would think, a no-no. Okay, but other than that, I've said what I need to say.
Okay, and are you happy, Mr. Bouchard, that you've had an opportunity to put your case forward today?
Yeah, no problem at all.
Okay. Is Mr. Longworth still with us, or has he left? I think he's left. Right.
No, he's left now.
Yeah, he's left. Okay, so finally, again, we come to the applicants. Mr. Warren, would you like to sum up your representation, please?
Of course. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll just indulge. I'll be no longer than 5 minutes, but just to address a few of the points that have been raised.
Just to say, Chairman, I've still got Mr. Longworth on the list here, actually.
Oh, right.
The meeting, just to clarify, Mr. Longworth, are you there?
No, I'm his wife. I've actually still got his phone open because
I'm
at the party. Okay.
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry. Thank you.
Sorry, Mrs. Longworth, did you want to say anything on Mr. Longworth's behalf before we go back to the applicant?
I would like to speak, actually. I would like to speak, and I can only reiterate what my husband has said and what Mr. Butchart said. But it's actually the noise. The noise is mentally. It's just so frustrating. You can't sit in your garden. You can't go to bed at night. You can't hear yourself speak. It's just a constant thumping. It's a real nuisance. We don't want the pub to shut. In actual fact, I've tried to order food off the pub, and nobody's actually cancelled my order. but that was only recently, and I can only presume that he's cancelled my order because, you know, he was upset because we've made a complaint, you know, against the alterations to their licence. But we don't want the pub to close down, and it has been here a long time. We do appreciate that people want to go to the pub, but we want it to be run better than it has, and we don't want this noise intrusion. It's the noise, it's the cars, it's the traffic, of course it's the urination and the problems outside. I appreciate that you're trying to fix this. However, whether the doormen will stay on the doors outside, we'll have to wait and see. But because we can't be here to police that, and we shouldn't have to police that, and we shouldn't have to listen to the intrusion of the music either.
Okay.
That's basically what I'm saying in a nutshell.
Okay. And are you happy, Mrs. Longworth, that you've had the opportunity today to put your case forward?
Sorry, say again.
Are you happy that you've had the opportunity to put your case forward today?
Yeah.
Okay. Back to Mr. Warren then. I do apologise, Mr. Warren. We will get to hear you eventually.
No, that's fine.
Yes, so would you like to carry on with your summation, please?
Thank you very much. I think I agree with you. It's crucial everyone has the chance to have their say properly in these matters. So absolutely no problems there. Let me just address some of the points that came up after I last spoke that I hadn't dealt with. Queuing is to do with COVID, and staggering opening times and 2-hour blocks are to stop what was the allegation of, you know, highly intoxicated people. They only have 2 hours at the premises, etc. And again, there was never any problem with queuing before, and we can assume there won't be again after COVID, but there has to be a means of getting people in and out. At times, yeah, the premises has been very busy, but frankly, I think we've all gone a bit stir crazy during lockdown, and I know that the week the government announced the new roadmap, I'd booked at least 3 places to go out and meet various people when I was allowed, and that's playing out across the country. And I think it's wrong to say that Yogi premises is the only premises playing live music. Many premises have put live music outside. Occasionally it causes issues. A lot of the time actually it's dealt with quite well, but Yogi's done more than most, it has to be said, to try and work hard to deal with these matters. So that's the final point I'd make about Councillor Haslam's point about extra supervision, potentially a condition. I think it's worth saying Mr. Mystery has worked with his security teams, I mentioned earlier, and gone above and beyond what he would have to do on his licence on a risk assessed basis. And bearing in mind those risk assessments change all the time as the roadmap changes, as the guidance changes, etc. I think it'd be wrong and disproportionate to impose a condition about the level of security he needs to provide. He has been doing it throughout. I understand entirely the point that Mrs. Longworth made, you know, that could stop, but there's been no evidence of him stopping doing that, and it's in his interest to ensure that the good relations he has with the majority of the community carry on. And as you heard from Yogi himself, he's got no interest in not speaking to people. His door is open. That is a fair point, I think, to make. Nothing you have heard today, to the main point I have about summing up, goes to the reason as to why you cannot grant a license for a bar outside on a permanent basis. The reason I say that is, irrespective of the markings, which are not part of this application today, and I'm sure they'll come up in the future in terms of planning and other things, people are allowed to use the outside areas of the premises because consumption is not a licensable activity. There will be people who don't have jabs for a long time. There will be people who don't want to have jabs. There are people who want to sit outside now and will continue to want to, even when we're out of this. And Yogi's always had outside areas, so the operation of the premises outside with a bar, as I say before, promotes the licensing objective of public safety in terms of stopping pinch points and in terms of constant supervision, which is promotion of the objective of preventing public nuisance. So there's no reason why you can't grant that application. The conditions, no one's argued that the license needs updating. So again, you can grant that part of the application. And in fact, it's key that you do so. In terms of the other things you've held, where you are taking those into account, I think there's a couple of points that just need to be made, if they were all very clear. Paragraph 9.43 of the guidance at page 76 makes it clear that the authority's determination should be evidence-based, justified as being appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives and proportionate to what it's intended to achieve. Now, you've heard that Yogi doesn't want to have music permanently outside of 8 single-day events. And if you wanted to put a condition on the license to that effect, you'd be more than entitled to do so. I just want to point to a letter, actually, that, again, Robert Jenner, MP, wrote to all chief executives and leaders of local authorities on the 15th of April 2021 this year, because it's important, and this actually says what we're doing now through COVID. It is in the public interest that local residents can socialise in a licensed and controlled environment outside where COVID-19 risks are lower. If a disproportionate regulatory approach is taken, it risks driving residents into unregulated activity and premises that may be far less COVID secure or illegal. Now, when you read all the letters in total and you read the evidence, and Paul Hamer, whether you want to argue if he knows where he is or not, gives a very good account of all the COVID measures that are put in place. It becomes very clear that he runs a very well managed COVID compliant establishment. And that is really important. And the final paragraph of Robert's letter says, cutting red tape in this way is a lifeline for businesses as they look to bounce back from a uniquely challenging year. We need your support to ensure the measures are known, made use of, and not impeded unnecessarily. Jobs and enterprise depend upon it. So that's the context here, and that's the reason why you can write this application today as it was put forward, with the 2 additional conditions we've added which go above and beyond the application, but promote the objectives and actually give an indication of how far Yogi's willing to go. And I just want to say on the music front, the levels of music, if you watch the video, you have watched the video, sorry, the videos you watched that were taken from Facebook that show the music levels, you can hear people talking underneath that. They're not shouting. They're not having to talk above the music. It's very, very clear how low that level of music is. So that, if you want, is the evidence of the evidence base. The EHO officer said that there has been no evidence provided of breaches of statutory nuisance or indeed anything else. And they say that's because they haven't visited, but they have visited and heard. They just haven't observed within properties whether there was a statutory nuisance. But if you take it all together, the evidence is the music does not cause a public nuisance. Now, Yogi will work with everyone going forward, but it's actually critical to his business that this application is granted insofar as that outside bar is key, in COVID times, but outside of it, as I say, promotes the objectives, and that's why we're here. So that's our application, and those are my submissions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Thank you, everybody that's had input into the meeting today. What we're going to do now, I'm going to ask everybody to leave the meeting, please, other than our legal advice, and the other councillors and myself will deliberate on this matter, and then we'll make our views known, and you'll get notice within 5 working days. Obviously, if the applicant wishes to appeal a decision that's made by this hearing today, they can do so through the Magistrates Court. So thank you very much for attending today, and if you could leave the meeting now, we will deliberate on the matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thanks,
and
Chair,
John, please could you
Thank you.
end the live event?